Good afternoon. I'm joined today by ATF Deputy Director Marvin Richardson, U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Texas, Chad Meacham, ATF Dallas Special Agent in Charge, Jeff Boschek, and ATF Dallas Task Force Officer, Lance Amos. The Justice Department is leaving no stone unturned in our efforts to protect communities from violent crime and the gun violence that often drives it. As part of the department-wide anti-violent crime strategy that we had launched last year, we are marshaling the resources of every one of our U.S. Attorney's offices, law enforcement agencies, grant-making entities, and other components to work in partnership with state and local law enforcement to disrupt violent crime. We are cracking down on the criminal gun trafficking pipelines that flood our communities with illegal drugs. We have set up strike forces to disrupt those networks from start to finish, from wherever illegal guns originate to wherever they are used to commit violent crimes. And we have instructed our federal prosecutors and law enforcement agents to prioritize prosecutions of those who are responsible for the greatest gun violence. Those include repeat offenders, who are the major drivers of violent crime. They also include those who illegally traffic in firearms and those who act as straw purchasers. The case we are announcing today is just one example of those efforts. Today, the Justice Department is announcing an indictment in the Northern District of Texas charging an individual with illegally dealing in firearms. Law enforcement ultimately recovered those guns in multiple cities in Texas, in Baltimore, Maryland, and in Canada. The defendant was arrested last Friday, June 10th, and has been charged with 1 count of dealing in firearms without a license and 3 counts of making false statements during the purchase of a firearm. The indictment charges that the defendant purchased at least 92 firearms, primarily handguns, from federally licensed firearms dealers. It alleges that 75 of those firearms were purchased from a single dealer in the span of just 6 months. That dealer has relinquished its federal firearms license to ATF. The indictment also states that law enforcement recovered 16 of the firearms in incidents including homicide, aggravated assault, and drug trafficking. Almost all of those guns were recovered in incidents occurring within 1 year of purchase. At least one of those guns was recovered by law enforcement 7 days, just 1 week after it was bought. Data from ATF's National Integrated Ballistics Information Network, also called NIBIN, showed that the firearms the defendant allegedly purchased were linked to multiple shootings in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. One of the firearms originally purchased by the defendant was linked to 2 separate aggravated assaults and 1 incident of unlawfully carrying of a firearm. The indictment also charges that 3 separate times over a 3-month period last year, the defendant falsely stated to a federal firearms licensee that he was the actual transferee and buyer of the firearms, when in fact he was not. Those firearms included a Taurus 9mm pistol, a Glock 9mm pistol, and a Glock 40 caliber pistol. The investigation is ongoing. I want to thank and recognize the prosecutors and law enforcement teams across the department whose exceptional work resulted in this indictment, including the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Texas and ATF's Dallas Field Division. As I said, this case is just one example of the efforts the Justice Department is taking to protect our communities from violent crime and from the illegal gun trafficking that often drives it. Just last month, in the Southern District of New York, we charged a couple who are alleged to have purchased 68 guns as part of an interstate gun trafficking conspiracy. Earlier this year, in the Central District of California, we charged an individual with illegally selling 89 firearms, including 53 ghost guns, as well as nearly 16 pounds of methamphetamine. Earlier this year in the District of Connecticut, we charged an individual who purchased at least 18 firearms in Georgia and who had others purchased even more on his behalf. He then illegally provided them to individuals in Connecticut. Some of those firearms ended up in the hands of gang members. Also this year in the District of Maryland, we charged 4 individuals after they allegedly sold an undercover officer 24 handguns, including 20 ghost guns, as well as confirmed and suspected machine gun conversion devices, several of which had been 3D printed. And in April of this year, I announced a superseding indictment charging 12 individuals with conspiracy to illegally traffic over 90 guns across state lines into the city of Chicago. In that case, the trafficked guns were linked to a mass shooting and other shootings in the Chicago area, in which multiple people were injured and several killed. As these examples make very clear, if you put illegal guns on our streets or into the hands of violent offenders, the Justice Department will spare no resource to hold you accountable. The Justice Department is committed to doing our part to end the plague of gun violence, and we strongly support Congress's efforts to do so as well. In recent weeks, mass shooting after mass shooting has taken the lives of children in their classrooms, beloved community members doing their grocery shopping, and worshipers gathering at their church. So, as our agents and prosecutors work to get crime guns out of our communities, we are also committed to doing everything we can to support the bipartisan gun safety negotiations that are taking place in Congress as we speak. Finally, the case we announced today illustrates the critical role that ATF plays in battling gun violence and saving lives. ATF needs permanent leadership to continue carrying on that fight, and we urge the Senate to act swiftly to confirm the President's nominee, Steve Dettelbach, to serve as director of ATF. Our agents and ATF's critical mission deserve nothing less. I'm now pleased to turn the program over to the United States Attorney, Chad Meacham.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I'm Chad Meacham, the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Texas, and I'm glad to be here with y'all today. I know that many of you have been shaken by the surge of gun crime across this country, especially those crimes committed by people the system has already deemed dangerous: convicted felons, protective order targets, and those with adjudicated mental health issues. But criminals cannot commit gun crime without access to guns. The Second Amendment protects the rights of law-abiding citizens, but not prohibited persons, nor those who arm them. The U.S. Attorney's Office, ATF Dallas, and the entire Department of Justice is working our level best to keep guns away from dangerous offenders before they can put finger to trigger. As General Garland mentioned, my office just indicted DeMontre Hackworth, a firearms dealer who allegedly purchased almost 100 handguns, many of which have turned up on the streets. The investigation indicates that one was recovered following a homicide near Fort Worth, Texas, just 55 days after purchase. Another was used during an assault near Dallas, only 78 days after purchase. Yet a third was left loaded in a vehicle with a young child just 42 days after purchase. 16 of the guns Mr. Hackworth allegedly purchased have been recovered in incidents and crimes not involving him across the United States and in Canada, most within a year of purchase. The investigation indicates that some had been used in more than one crime. As charged in the indictment, Mr. Hackworth obtained guns from federally licensed firearm dealers, falsely identified himself on ATF forms as the actual transferee, and then turned around and illegally provided them to others. Federal law does not allow alleged profiteers to engage in the business of dealing firearms, devoting time and effort to obtaining and reselling guns for monetary gain without a license. When an unlicensed dealer purchases guns for others, he allows the actual recipients to bypass background checks. Or where or not of the recipient's past, an unlicensed dealer may well hand over guns to some of society's most dangerous individuals, prohibited persons like drug dealers, human traffickers, even murderers. Selling to customers who cannot pass background checks allows guns to be used in real crimes against real victims, people whose lives may never be the same. Before I turn the podium over to my colleague from ATF, I want to make one point. These cases are not easy to investigate or prosecute. The law enforcement agents literally had to work multiple cases backwards before the identity of someone like this defendant becomes even known. You can only imagine the kind of dedication it takes to run each purchase to ground and then take all that evidence and bring this type of charge. We thank the prosecution team for their efforts. We may never know how many lives we saved by stopping this defendant's allegedly illegal gun trafficking. I'll next turn the podium over to ATF Special Agent in Charge in Dallas, Jeff Boshek.
Thank you, Chad. General Garland. Hello, and good afternoon. My name is Jeff Boshek, and I'm the Special Agent in charge of ATF's Dallas Field Division. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives is the lead federal law enforcement agency involved in investigations of illegal firearms trafficking, and the Dallas Field Division investigates these crimes in North Texas, Oklahoma, and southern New Mexico. ATF is the sole agency in the United States authorized to trace firearms for law enforcement, and ATF traced more than 500,000 crime guns nationwide in FY21. Over the past 3 years, a pattern emerged as firearms were recovered throughout the United States and Canada. As those firearms were investigated and traced by ATF, many had a single commonality. As the indictment charges, they had been purchased by DeMontre Hackworth. 9 firearms recovered in the Dallas area were traced back to an alleged purchase by Hackworth. Another firearm recovered in Longview, Texas, was traced back to an alleged purchase by Hackworth. An additional firearm recovered in Baltimore was traced back to an alleged purchase by Hackworth. And incredibly, another 4 firearms recovered in Canada were also traced back to an alleged purchase by Hackworth. As the investigation continued, ATF special agents scoured the Dallas area, visiting federal firearms licensees, and discovered the extent of Hackworth's suspicious purchases. As the indictment charges, from 2019 throughout 2021, Hackworth purchased at least 92 firearms, illegally trafficking these firearms throughout the area. These firearms were later used in incidents including aggravated assault, homicide, and drug trafficking, at least one within 7 days of being purchased. Illegal firearms trafficking is not a victimless crime. There are real consequences when individuals illegally engage in the business of buying and selling firearms. ATF will continue to use all available resources to strategically target and identify illegal firearm sales, trafficking patterns, and sources of crime guns, and to interrupt the illegal flow of firearms to criminal gang members, felons, firearms traffickers, and all persons who are otherwise prohibited from possessing firearms under federal law. Our strategy is to impact violent crime in our communities. It's comprehensive. We strive to identify not only those who commit violence throughout our neighborhoods, but also those who provide the tools to do so. This investigation is a prime example of us leveraging technology and partnerships to do just that. This is not just a job to us. We live in these same communities being ravaged by violent crime across the country. It's our calling to make communities safer. You can rest assured that we won't stop our pursuit of those who spread violence and terror throughout our communities. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, with that, we'll take some questions. Dallas Morning News.
Thank you. General, can you say that this was part of a particular pattern, this particular buyer and this gun dealer in Waxahachie, or were this just one entrepreneurial gun trafficker? And why hasn't the gun seller been charged with anything?
So on the first question, the charges are what they are. They're included in the indictment. We don't charge anything more, but this is an ongoing investigation. On the second question, I'll ask the U.S. Attorney.
With regard to the dealer in Waxahachie that's mentioned in particular, that person has surrendered his license to sell firearms legally and can no longer legally sell firearms in the United States. As General Garland just said, the investigation continues, but that's where we are at this stage.
You guys just outlined how difficult it was to make a case like this. The Senate just recently announced a deal for new legislation. We noticed that one of the things that's not in there is any kind of standalone statute that might go to some of this conduct by straw purchasers. Can you, Attorney General, or anyone on the stage, address the need for something like that would make the work a lot easier to go after these people who are doing these types of crimes? And then secondly, for you, Attorney General, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's
And I'll let you do the second one too. Otherwise, I'll forget the first question. Look, the answer is there are a lot of things Congress can do that will help fight the scourge of gun crime. But we do think that at least the framework that I read about this morning with respect to the bipartisan negotiations would be meaningful progress in that direction. And now, your second question?
Well, I wanted to ask you whether you had a chance to look at the hearings or watch the hearings on Capitol Hill on the January 6th by the January 6th committee, and if you've learned anything, perhaps that could be useful in the Justice Department's work.
So I am watching, and I will be watching all the hearings, although I may not be able to watch all of it live. But I'll be sure that I'll be watching all of it, and I can assure you that the January 6th prosecutors are watching all the hearings as well. On this, which I'll now count as your third question, look, I'm not going to be able to give you an idea of my own personal responses to this or the kind of evidence that are coming out, and I want to just explain a little bit more, although I did start explaining a little bit more, I think the last time we were all together 2 weeks ago or so, press conference. The Justice Department's long-standing position is that we don't comment on ongoing investigations. We do that both for the viability of our investigations and because it's the right thing to do with respect to the civil liberties of people under investigation. In slightly more expansive, we have three reasons. They're all, I say, co-equal. One is that our investigations generally proceed quietly and in secret so that we don't tell witnesses where we are. We don't want them to know. We want truthful answers as we approach. We want to be able to do our subpoenas and search warrants without any risk. Eventually that information comes out in the form of our search warrant affidavits, comes out in our orders, comes out in our pleadings, and eventually if there are charges. But for our investigations to proceed in an efficient way, we have learned over many, many years this is the way our investigations should go. Secondly, this is what protects the civil liberties of people who have not been charged. We don't impugn people until we actually charge them. This is part of the rule of law in America. And third, there are the people who we have charged. As all of you well know, we've charged well over 800 people now in connection with January 6th. Some of them have pled, but others are facing proceedings. And for us to comment about evidence, some of which regards them, some of which regards others, could affect their cases and could affect our ability to proceed in an effective way. So that's the reason, and it's the reason that this has been the longstanding position of the Justice Department.
Mr. Attorney General, not speaking about a specific investigation, but there have been open questions with regard to whether there exists a body of law at the Office of Legal Counsel or elsewhere in the Justice Department that's not public that would limit prosecutors' ability to pursue obstruction or conspiracy charges against people at the highest levels of this government or previous governments. What can you say about the existence of legal interpretations that may bind you in that regard?
I can say at this point, this investigation is proceeding according to facts and the law. We are not obstructed from continuing our investigation in any way. And we will continue to do that. There's nothing within the Office of Legal Counsel that prevents us from doing an investigation. And I think most of the things you're referring to are well known anyway. So there's nothing that's coming in the way of our investigation. We are proceeding with full urgency with respect, as I've said many times before, to hold all perpetrators who are criminally responsible for January 6th accountable, regardless of their level, their position, and regardless of whether they were present at the events of January 6th. We're just going to follow the facts wherever they lead.